Hey guys, Razor Gresher here again. This is going to be my next weekly video here today, and I unfortunately, this is a big topic of mine that I want to talk about. So I'm unfortunately not going to go through a whole lot of editing, adding the photos that I like to do and the sides and whatnot. I really wish I had someone to do that for me. Like, that'd be so great. All I want to do is just give my opinions out there and then have someone else make the video look really good. Because I'm not a video editor. I don't know the whole lot of that skill set. I don't have a whole lot of time to do it. But I digress. Today's or this week's video is one, like I said, a very huge topic that has kind of been on the back of my mind for a while, and I've mentioned it a few times during my stream. It is the simple fact that the way buff removal is in this game needs to start leading in a different direction. And now I know that's a huge blanket statement, and I know everyone's out there like, what are you talking about? Buff removal is like really key to this game. I'm not saying get rid of it. I'm saying specify it a lot more. If every order, pretty much except for nature, can remove just 2 buffs at any time with an action card, that is such a huge tempo swing on any opponent that it really almost rewards players to not play buffs, which is where we've been leading into with these Astral and Tech just attack buffless aggro decks, which we've been seeing. And those are the decks that are sadly rising to the top, other than like the Dread decks. And the reason that the Dread Abyss package deck is doing so well is because those buffs, literally just the like 20, 25 cards of those are buffs. And they're all clunky corners, so they're not going anywhere. They're staying on the board the entire time, and it's not like you have to line them up properly. You just lay them out, lay them out, lay them out, and do the thing. They're very easy to play with. But the way buff removal is one action card removes 2 buffs, just any buffs of any kind. It can be a combo buff, can be an action buff, no matter what it says, unless you have like ways to protect your buffs, which is usually with other buffs nowadays. And to me, that's like, wow, that feels really bad. Obviously, yes, it's a good tempo swing. 2 for 1. Of course, your opponent plays a really good combo buff. Boom. Here's my here's my I think it's the Thunder Slug. Here's my Crystal Leech. Here's my Shadow Puppet. Just gone. That's gone. Done. Your combo is gone with one of my action cards, and you've paid for that combo with whatever's in your hands. So now your hand's shrunk. It's a huge tempo swing turn. Now, I'm not saying those are bad. Those are really good in card games to have tempo turns to go back and forth because it goes along with player interactivity. When your opponent is literally a buffless aggro deck and you're playing a deck that runs about 2 or 3 buff removal cards, 9 times out of 10 it's 3, that literally means that 1/10 of your deck, because you start with 4 or 5 cards in your hand, right? Your deck, boom, about 1/10 of your deck is a dead draw. All it is buff removal, and if your opponent has no buffs, that is a dead draw. And 10% of your deck being dead against your opponent, who literally your opponent goes, my entire deck is flawless, like I can do whatever I want. That feels really bad, and that is, once again, as we've seen many times in the past, is one of those like drawbacks that's avoidable, right? You avoid your drawback of your opponent getting good swing turns against you by just not running buffs. That's all you do. You just don't run buffs. You run attack cards, you run card draw, and maybe a little bit of defend for healing when you get a little low. But that's about it. That's all you got to do. Astral does it really well because all of its cards synchronize into each other while drawing you cards with either additional actions or just card draw along with it. Tech does it phenomenally well because a lot of Tech cards say draw extra cards, put a card back, do extra cards, get all this stuff. And Tempest and Selene are great examples of that hero. Discard 1 card, draw 2 cards. We need, at least in my opinion, you guys can disagree with me all you want. In my opinion, we need to start getting this game a little more player interactive. Because right now, if you're literally playing buffless aggro, there's nothing your opponent can do to stop cards from coming out of your hand. We used to have cards like Shadow Wraith, Exterior Defender, Subjugator, cards to put down on the board to make it so your opponent couldn't attack for a turn or 2 turns, the next attack, whatever it was. We decided those cards were really broken. They got rotated out. My opinion, it was good for the game. And the problem wasn't making my opponent attack. It was the fact that if I'm running a deck that I built to, synchronize, get my board going, have all these really cool synergies along with it, and I just get blown up by turn 6 because someone removed 2 of my buffs that I really relied on and just attacked me with 5 damage cards, and I had buff removal in my hand and I couldn't do anything because it was a dead card in my hand, that feels really bad. That feels almost like demoralizing, that it's like, well, I can't beat Hyper Aggro because he doesn't run buffs, so all my buff draw is just a dead draw. 1/10 of your deck is a dead draw. And the reason I think buff removal needs to start going in a better direction, and the thing is that we've already seen cards come out that are going in that direction, and it's like under the radar because no one's really paying that much attention to them. And these cards need to start being more impactful, and the only way they are is if buff removal, the way it is, changes entirely. And I know I've said this before, and I know a lot of other people have heard it. The company at PlayFusion, I've been able to talk to some of the staff members at a few Gen Cons a while back, and they literally said, I think last Gen Con when Kindred was released, if the game, they were making it right now, buff removal would not be the way it is today. And that is a huge statement that the company itself has been believing that buff removal needs to change for a while. And I hope down the road they finally change it and they get into a better spot for it. Because right now, like I said, it does feel really bad. And the reasons that it feel really bad, and here I'm going to list some of the reasons. Like I said, I wish I could edit the video and had time to do it and stuff, but I'm really busy. The summer's coming up, yada, yada, yada. I'll give you as many excuses as I can give you, but I just listen to the words. Listen to the words. Rewatch the video if you have to. The cards that I wish that would lead into a better direction, or no, what was I saying? The buff removal needs to change, is because an action card, first of all, unless it specifically reacts to combo cards, should not be able to react to both. Buff removal should not be able to remove a combo buff. An action card should not be able to interact with a combo card unless it specifies it, like a lot of the Storm cards say, return a combo card to your hand, rotate a combo card forward with the new stuff, like search for a combo card. They should not just be able to search for an attack card or a defend card or a buff card. That way, because alone in itself, without a specification or action or combo, it's way too broad and way too powerful of a card to really like kind of narrow down the fine tuning of the aspects and really broaden your horizon for your whole card pool, because things are very generic. Like the 5 damage cards, like the 4 damage cards, all that stuff is it feels very generic, and that's what aggro was doing. It's literally just 5 damage, 5 damage, 5 damage, 5 damage, and you're sitting here trying to line up a really cool board, trying to set it up, which is what Lightseekers, which is what I fell in love with in Lightseekers, is being able to manipulate the board, get it to a certain state, really start kind of putting your machine together and getting everything working, and your opponent just blows you out because it's just 5 damage, 5 damage, 5 damage, 5 damage, and there's no way you can interact with an attack card. There's nothing you can do about it because it comes right from their hand. It's not the board where you can interact with it. And that's where it feels bad. And we need to step away from the one action card removing 2 buffs. We need to step away from that entirely. The cards that are coming out that I was talking about, Hired Saboteur, Loot Snatcher, and all the family-specific buff removal, those feel so much nicer. Those feel so much better to add in. Because not only do they specify or have a condition to remove a buff, Hired Saboteur, you have to wait 3 turns, and it removes buffs that would be damage preventing at the end of the turn. It does 5 damage, so it's going to get through, or it's going to hit quite a lot of damage prevention, and then it removes those types of buffs. Loot Snatcher, 3 damage. We've seen cards with 3 damage. They're okay. They're awesome. But if it has a condition to meet. If your opponent has 4 or more buffs out, you get to remove 1. That feels really good. Because that one I feel okay being generic because it's 4 buffs, right? Your opponent has to have a wide board for you to get better value out of Loot Snatcher. And we have the family-specific cards where we have the remove 2 buffs in Poison. We have the Blast Bot, remove a location buff. We have all these very family-specific cards. So it seems like it's back to the rock, paper, scissors type in the archetype where certain orders are better against other things, and then you can splice stuff in if you really want a better matchup and stuff like that. Get that specific buff removal in there. And that's where I think we need to start leading into buff removal, is more conditional or more specific buff removal, so that the people who you really can push and utilize the buff mechanic. Because if your opponent has a somewhat harder time to get with your board, that means that they got to start running, things like Mountain Fort or like more defensive buffs. And we can really start having that player-to-player interactivity that I really fell in love with in this game. And like I said, you can disagree with me all you want. You can say, Frank, that's a stupid idea. Razor Greshy, what are you talking about? I love the game the way it is. That's completely fine. Like I said, this is just my opinion on why this stuff needs to change. Also, to mention, when you compare Crystal Leech, which can remove 2 buffs, to a card like Rock Melter, which is a combo defend card that does... Or no, Rock Melter is an attack. It does 5 damage and removes 1 buff. It's a combo that removes a buff. That's fine. That's fine. A combo that removes 1 buff, it can be a combo, it can be an action card. A combo can interact with anything, I feel. A combo has that broad horizon to interact with everything. You're paying for it with action cards. It should be able to interact with a lot of things. That's where I strongly believe the generic buff removal belongs, is in the combos. We have Devour Soul, which is 8 healing, remove a buff. And what I'm saying is here, if a combo that costs 2 cards to play or to pay for it only removes 1 buff. In comparison to the action card that removes 2 buffs, you kind of see the outweighing balance here of control. Like those action cards should not be able to remove 2 of any card when a combo can only remove 1 of any card. Yes, it does extra things along with it too, but guess what? Reckless Spirit does 3 damage, removes 1 buff. You can compare that pretty easily to like Rock Melter. It's 2 more damage on a combo. Yes, the damage bypasses damage reduction, yada yada yada. You can, if they have damage reduction, then that's where that comes into play. Otherwise, it's 2 more damage for a combo version of a Reckless Spirit. That just kind of blows my mind. That's insane. Devour Soul is 8 healing on a combo buff. There's a lot of defends out there right now that heal you for 7. Like, that's ridiculous that it can heal for almost the same amount, but it removes a buff, which is really nice. It feels sometimes really good to do that. And if we start getting into more cards where, like Loot Snatcher, which specifies into, has to have 4 buffs on the board, and honestly, in my opinion, that's where these really fun games will start coming from, and that's where you can really tap into the aspect of having a much wider board. And then once you get to a certain point, that's when you're like, okay, now I got to avoid, or I got to play around my opponent possibly having Loot Snatcher, right? I got to play around my opponent possibly having a location removal if he has it in his hand. But I know some buffs are fine if I stay under 3, so I can really kind of slow down my game, really kind of pace itself out. Like I said, coming from me, and I'll put a blanket statement right here, I am a more control, more tempo player like that. I do play aggro every once in a while just because I need to learn the entire game. It's not my favorite, so I'm trying to stay very biased on this, where it's like, no, we need to slow the game down because I like playing slow. I'm not saying that at all. I'm not saying that at all. What I'd like to see, you can still keep your nothing but attack your buffless aggro, stuff like that. But if you have more generic buff removal, at least the buff decks can compete with the aggro decks. Yes, the aggro decks work really well because, hey, 5 damage right away, 5 damage, 5 damage, 5 damage. And if you put a buff on a board, it's got to wait 2 or 3 turns before it actually does anything. But if you lay those cards down and wait a whole turn, then the aggro decks have a chance to just rush you down, which is what they do. And if you can outpace them, or if you can heal them, then you play defensively to beat aggro. That's what it's always been in every card game or any game that I've ever played. And I feel like if we start changing our buff removal to the point where it is more specific, more generic, then not only will the games feel a little more balanced, it'll really bring in the buff mechanic that the game is built upon. It is built upon the buff mechanic. If you look at the card pool, there's over 300 buff cards compared to like 100 attack cards and 120 defend cards. There's like 3 times as many buff cards. And the decks that are doing extremely well are the buffless decks. And that blows my mind that literally like 3/5 of the entire card pool is being neglected to build good decks. I'm like, how is that even possible? And by doing this, by getting into a more generic style of buff removal, some of these combos, which literally were joked at several times ago and looked at and like, why would anyone run these cards? They're so dumb. Reclamation and Poisonous Mist, go look them up. They're family-specific combo buff removal. But if you look at them and you sit there going, wow, those are really bad cards. I looked at them and was like, they're stepping in the right direction of buff removal here. They're going into a more, like I said, narrowed tunnel vision form of buff removal where it doesn't feel bad to actually play buffs. It feels bad to have a certain matchup against other decks. And that's where you get the whole like, oh, hey, the Mountain's been doing really well. Okay, if Mountain's been doing really well, maybe I'll go in to play, a nature deck that plays Reclamation, remove a lot of their location buffs. I'll play the Chimchu that removes the elemental buffs. I'll go ahead and just play Blastbot in tech, those location. There's certain things that are better against certain orders, and that'll have a really good kind of rotation of who beats who, what beats what, and really starts cycling through the meta and does it really well. And of course, that means that your combos you can really start utilizing combos that people just don't even use anymore, like Reclamation, Poisonous Mist, because like, hey, these are dead cards. I'd rather have my combos just do attacks. And it's like, okay, but if I suddenly am limited on how I'm controlling the board and what buffs I can use, Poisonous Mist might just be a combo that rises to the surface. We might start cycling through these cards that are not even heard of or touched because they're just not as good as the action cards that we can run. And that's where you can also broaden up your combo card pool horizon. You can really start getting really fun and fancy with what your combos can do. Just really, instead of being really generic, really fine tune them. And like cards like Rile Up, like I never even heard of that card. But if buffs become, or buff removal becomes less of a thing, all the Kriebel buffs that we've been putting out, all the stuff that we've been doing really nice for Nature. Nature has some really interesting buffs and Kriebel cards to go along with it nowadays. And Rile Up, it's like, hey, if you can't remove my buffs, yeah, I'll look for like 4 Kriebel cards to put into my hand, and they're all the buff cards. They're the Mossfoot Ridge Rider, or the Mossfoot Swift Rider? I don't know. It's the X5. There is the other Mossfoot that's 2/2/2 Clunky Corners, has an attack or has a defend ability. That one is really strong, but the simple fact is that, you know, my opponent could just remove it with an action card. Feels really bad. And if you go into the things like Loot Snatcher, like I said, if you start getting more specific on how your buff removal works, you can really start opening up some of the other fun mechanics, which I've been trying to have fun with. And I don't know if other people are, they just never tried them because they're really bad against buff removal. Your water buff mechanic that they're going for, you got to have 4 more water buffs for the Fearless Diver to work, or you got to have your forest buffs. You got to go wide on board in Nature to have more buffs than your opponent. You got to have certain buffs next to one another. You got to do all these other things. With a card that says, hey, if you have 4 or more, I can finally remove one of your buffs. And it's like, okay, well, you know, once I get up to 4 and Fearless Diver goes off, cool, then I have 1 turn or whatnot. It's like, okay, I have 4 water buffs out. Perfect. Then Loot Snatcher actually becomes a card in the back of your mind. It's like, oh god, okay, I have 4. He better not have Loot Snatcher. Was he saving it this whole time? Otherwise, it's just a 3 attack card. 3 attack is perfectly fine. I'll play a 3 attack card all day. I mean, I don't need to do an extra thing with 3 attack, but if it has a condition that can be improved, that's awesome. Improving conditions as opposed to like 3 damage draw card, Chrono Moth, people are going to run that no matter what, right? It's because it's always guaranteed to have max value. But if there's cards that have conditional increases, I think that really will help broaden your card pool, really advance the game mechanics of what's good at certain situations, really start shifting up the meta entirely, and it all starts with changing buff removal the way it is today. And you guys have changed it where they actually have family mechanics, and in my opinion, that's why, like, oh, that was really weird of you to do, right? Giving Thunderslug Beast, awesome, because now, like, Poisonous Mist or the Dread one can remove the Beast buff before it goes off. Awesome, you have specific buff removal. But like Crystal Leech getting Beast, you can search for a Beast card, put a buff removal in your hand. That feels really bad. Especially when 1 action card can remove 2 of any card that's on the board. Not a conditional of what it can do, it's just 2 of any card. We talking combo buff, we talking normal buff, etc. People have already on Discord, not just today, but other days, oh, Nature's so bad because Reckless Spirit only removes 1 buff. Yeah, I get it. Nature's not supposed to have the best time with buff removal. Nature's supposed to be, I go wide on board, I have more board control than you. Their nature is really trying to strive for its family aspect of, I have more buffs than you out. So having that accumulate with the very hard to remove your buffs, if it had a 2 buff removal, Nature would be insane. Nature would be nuts. Be like, hey, I have 2 or more buffs than you because I'm removing 2 buffs at a time. Like, Nature would be busted beyond all belief. And I really think that if you keep kind of the Nature's limit down, maybe give them like the worst family to remove. Like they have they already have the Undead. What am I saying? Undead is like only in 1 family and it's in Dread. It's a little bit in Nature as well, but it has the Chimchu, which removes an Undead buff, draw a card, 1 damage, what have you, and whatnot. Like that card might actually see play if we got rid of Reckless Spirit, if we got rid of Crystal Slug, and it's like, okay, well, if I come against Undeads, awesome, I got the card. If not, I'm going to have a really hard time with buff removal. Maybe I run some Loot Snatchers in the main deck. Maybe I try to do something where I go wide on board, and I'm struggling a little bit to remove my buffs, but I know that my opponent is also struggling to remove mine unless they have specific cards to do so. And it doesn't feel bad to lay your buffs. And now I'm going round and round and round in my head, going cyclically of all the stuff that I wanted to talk about. And at the heart and the core of this video, the next thing that I want them to change, and I say the next thing because, hey, guys, I've been an advocate on changing some of these cards since the beginning of the time. I wanted Crazed Bomber to change. Guess what? It did. I wanted Abyss Tentacles to get Clunky Corners. Everyone was like, no, give it Burn Unique. Guess what? It got Clunky Corners, and no one said a thing. Everyone was super happy with it. I wanted Cage of Oppression to go to 1/1/1 instead of 2/2/2, and everyone's like, no, that's you'll kill the card. The card is doing better. The card is doing fine, and I still recommend changes for that card. I still think it needs another nerf because it's still just doing exactly what it was doing already. It's just being put in every deck instead of being pigeonholed into the 1 heal type decks. I do strongly believe that buff removal is the number 1 thing that needs to change in this game, because if those cards get, just retired, just hey, this whole block of buff removal, it's getting knocked to legacy. Like, they're getting rotated out. There have been specific cards that have been banned, limited, and all these other card games. It's not a new thing that's like, oh, it's from the new set. It wouldn't get rotated out for a few sets. There have been cards in like one set, goes to one tournament. They figure out how busted it is because the developers didn't see the interactions until that tournament. It's like, okay, that card's banned. That card just wins every game. It's too hard to go around. Buff removal can just be a banned card. It can be moved to Legacy, and you can introduce the new set of buff removal in the new set. Do whatever you have to do, but buff removal, in my opinion, is one thing that needs to change if this game is going to grow again. This game has been doing amazing growth over the past 2 sets with Kindred and Uprising, and now the Wave 5 set. We're already getting some of those really dynamic cards, really cool cards like that. But what we need is more, I guess, limited control. We need more refined control and limited control, not broaden horizon control. Because, like I said, every single deck that I run is always like, hey, you know what? I'm going to snock 3 buff removal in there right away. Doesn't matter what it is, because those will always swing me turns, win me the games. Give the generic buff removal to combos. That's where it belongs. If you want to play a control deck, your combo should be able to remove any card on the field at any time. The combos are 5 in the deck. You can either be aggro combo, control combo, buff combo, whatever you want to do, but have your combos be the generic things. Have a 4-cost combo. There's combos out there, Black Hole, Nuke, Crushing Rapids, that remove multiple combos, if not the entire board. That's where they belong, is on combos. You don't want your action cards to literally be equivalent to some of these 4-cost combos in a sense. Because think about this, if some decks only run like 2 or 3 buffs, and they're only doing those on the board, they're keeping those on the board the entire time, 1 Crystal Leech takes care of the whole board, right? The same thing is if, like I said, the same deck you're going against, you lay Black Hole, a 4-cost combo, wipes the whole board. Only 2 buffs that player was really using, only had 2 buffs at a time, didn't need to go wide on board. The action card is then comparable to a 4-cost combo card. That's insane to me. That is insane to me. And when you start comparing things like that, like you start, in my mind, in the back of my mind, I'm like, okay, that means that, yeah, it really needs to change. We really need to figure out how to do buff removal better. And it really isn't the fact that they need to figure out how to do it. They've already figured it out. They've already started making these cards. They've made cards, Hired Saboteur, Loot Snatcher, all the family-specific buff removal in every single order. They've figured it out. They've been sneaking it in under the radar, but none of us have been really laying them. The only one that has been seeing is the Poison one, which removes 2 Beast buffs, because it's the only one that actually removes 2 family members, and Beast is probably the most common family outside of Elemental that's been played all across the orders. So that one is probably run maybe like a 1 of in a deck, just to have extra buff removal in Dread. So they've already put these cards into play. They've started to add the combo buffs that remove multiple of a family member. They started to do all this stuff that, Devour Soul, Rock Melter. Those have been put in the game. 1 generic buff removal. That's fine. They've already implemented the cards that'll help kind of really broaden the horizon of what these decks can do. All they got to do is maybe make a few more in that area of card mechanics, and just retire the original buff removal they had from the Awakening set that came out. Retire all 5 of them that are left, Crazed Bomber excluded because that's already gone. Retire those things entirely. Get us back, or get us into the future of a more broadened horizon of a variety of decks that can start doing really fun things. And in the back of your mind, like, okay, if I'm playing against Tech, my location cards are the weak ones. Those are the ones I have to hold back. But I have some locations that are key to this deck. I really got to find a way to protect them, make sure my opponent doesn't do anything. Okay, I'm playing an Undead, or I'm playing a Dread deck. I'm going against Mountain. Okay, I'm fine. Like I can do things on the board. I can lay things out. I can start playing my deck the way it's supposed to without feeling that worried. And guess what? Loot Snatcher comes out like, oh, I overextended. I forgot about Loot Snatcher because it's an unaligned card that I haven't seen. You really start to get into these really cool aspects of cards that you haven't seen before, rising to the top and seeing actual impact on the game. And also, like I said, if your buff removal becomes more specific, that'll help, in my strong opinion, that'll help balance out the buffless aggro, because those cards that target specific families also do additional damage, do some healing, whatever you have to do. They do some stuff along with it. So you still can use this as an action card even if they don't have a buff. It'll just be like at 50% level, right? Because it's not doing its extra bonus thing that you wanted in the deck for. But it'll give the buffless aggro, it'll make it feel a lot more comfortable with the buff decks. Because buffless aggro, like I said, is just attack and draw. There's nothing really to it, with some defend. Buffs is buff and draw. Buff and draw, maybe some defense there and whatnot. But it'll really help balance it out, in my opinion. In my strong opinion, I think that it'll balance it out. And if you wanna comment and talk to me about it, hit me up on Discord, join me on the Twitch channel, start giving me your discussion and opinion. But I really do feel like the next big change that we need to have in Lightseekers is the way buff removal is handled. And the first thing that needs to happen is we need to retire the original 5. Crazy Bomber's already out. We need to retire the original 5, probably even Hammer Down, in my opinion. Those 5 need to get, retired, and really start bringing in the whole, how can I make buff removal more sporadic? What can I do with combo cards to make them more of the generic buff removal? Maybe have more buffs that say, if this buff is removed, if my opponent has 3 or more buffs, remove a buff as well. Or if if it makes it to a certain corner. I think the Nightglade Kennel is a great example of a new one. If you draw 3 beast cards and reveal them, the last corner is remove a buff. A buff that, it has a condition to meet before it can remove a buff. And if your opponent wants to remove it, it's a location card. There's a lot of stuff that removes locations out there. And I think these are great cards that go into how buff removal needs to be handled in the future. Is you have to feel like you've gotten to the point where it's really interactive with your opponent. My opponent saw the card out there. I needed to draw 3 specific families for it to go off before it does anything. My opponent needed to go wide on board. Therefore, this card is now activated. And it really, with that, brings us into the player-player interactive. You need to be able to see your opponent's board to figure out your game plan, and have your opponent see your board to do vice versa. Because having the buffless aggro be the way it is because of the way buff removal is not interactive in this game at all. It's not interactive in this game at all, because all your opponent really has to watch out for is either the defensive buffs or the buffs that, like if you get attacked, they deal damage back. Like some of those might be detrimental, but if you can just blow them out quick enough with attacks, their buffs still have to rotate before they do anything, and sometimes you just overwhelm them, which is what aggro should be doing. But aggro also needs to be able to not have that major drawback of legitimately making a 10th of your opponent's deck just be dead the way it is. And I think having that balance of specific buff removal, also doing conditional like damage, healing, whatever not, will really help balance and really help refine the entire meta as a whole. I think that's all I wanted to say. Like I said, I wish I could do amazing edits to this video. I wish I could post up the card pictures of the cards I'm talking about so people who are watching this can get a refined idea. But please, PlayFusion, if you're watching this, take that under consideration. I know for a fact that you also wanted to change buff removal as well. I think that within the next year, if buff removal stays the same way, it's going to be really hard for this game to grow and broaden its horizons in either its deck pool, its card pool, or anything in specific if we consistently keep bringing back these action cards that can remove 2 of any buff, combo and action card, and have nothing to really counterplay buffless aggro. That's my video, guys. Like I said, I really hope you enjoyed it. I really hope it starts a discussion with you guys. You can hate it all you want. You can tell me how much you dislike it. Say, no, I want my Crystal Leech. That card is amazing. Why would you ever get rid of it? Why would you change Shadow Puppet? It does amazing things. Yes, Reckless Spirit does need to get changed because nature needs a lot more control. And tell me what you want to do in the comments below. Please do. Please like the video. Subscribe to my channel if you want to. I'm trying to make some more of these videos. Even if they just come out like this, just me talking and not a whole lot of fancy stuff when I have time. But the main thing of these videos that I want to get out there is my opinions, my discussions, that I do have on Twitch, so please join my Twitch channel. We can have these live. But these videos are more for small digestible pieces of my opinions on the game and the state the way it is, and how I think things need to change, how I like the way things are going, how I feel Lightseekers can either be improved or it's already being improved, and how I like it. I try to give constructive criticism the best I can. I try to be constructive instead of just, oh, I hate this, is dumb. That's not me. I don't say dumb. I don't put anyone down. If I don't like something, I tell you why I don't like something, as opposed to saying that stinks, that's bad. And that's what I want everyone else to do. I want you guys to take away from this video the constructive criticism aspect. That if you're gonna say you don't like something, explain why you don't like it and suggest a change if you can think of something better. If you think of a change, that's a better way to communicate to PlayFusion themselves and to us as a community of how you think this card is affecting the game and why you don't like it. Now I feel like I'm just making dead space. I'm going to end the video here, guys. Like I said, please like the video down below if you like it. Dislike it if you don't like it. Leave a comment below and we'll start a discussion. I love hearing from you guys, so please join me on Discord. Please join me on Twitch. I will see you guys out there seeking that light. Please play Fusion. Buff removal. That's the next big change that will bring this game into the new light. Have a good one, guys.